The First World War is the catalyst for the modern world that we live in. So many things were changed as a result of what happened between 1914 and 1918 that we really should look at it again. It's a long way away. There's nobody around anymore who remembers it. When I was a kid, there were people around who were born in the Victorian years who you could talk about the First World War with them. I used to run errands for a guy who'd been gassed in Flanders in 1918. They're all gone. We have no direct connection with it. So organising a commemoration, I think, is important, is significant. Well, we were already going to mark the 100th anniversary of the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand on Saturday. I'd asked three musicians who were taking part in the Radical Roundup with me. I actually chose them specifically because I knew they had songs pertaining to the First World War. Matt Skinner has a beautiful song called The Scarecrow, which he'll be performing, which is based on a poem written by someone who's in the trenches. O'Hooley and Tidow, I know they've got a song about the nurse Edith Cavell, although they've written a new song to perform for the project. And Get Cape, Wear Cape, Fly, Sam Duckworth. He's a very good songwriter. I knew if I said to him, you know, we're celebrating the first, he'll be like, oh, that's interesting. As a young female songwriter, Lucy Ward, who's performing today, she's written a song. I was confident that she would be able to do that. And Robb Johnson, who's performing on Sunday, has actually written an entire song cycle about his two grandfathers' experience during the First World War called Gentle Men, which is really, really brilliant. So it was absolutely no-brainer to invite him to be part of the project as well. Although we're not celebrating, we are trying to respect, commemorate in a respectful way what happened to those people, real people, individual people during the First World War.
The song is from a poem by a little-known World War I poet from Manchester called James Lyons. And I was reading some of his poetry. It's not very well known at all, and a friend of mine came across a book of poems and gave them to me, and I read through some poems of his, and The Scarecrow just blew out the pages for me, and it was a real inspiration, and just the imagery that it created was really somber but magical at the same time. And the Scarecrow being there doing his duty, just like the soldiers in the trenches, a ragged coat and a stick of wood just gives that image of the soldiers standing there in the trenches with their guns sort of ready. Because he's so unknown, it deserves something written about. So I turned it into a song, and that just inspired me to write more, and other songs that have written about war, about inner struggles as well as the wars around us. I think, it's really, really relevant, and we should all remember.
We were really interested in writing a song from a woman's perspective, because there aren't that many about women and how their kind of roles in the First War.
We know a woman called Georgina Boys, and she's a bit of an expert on folk music and folk dance in particular. So we asked her about who could we write about, and she said, well, I know who you should write about. She said, nobody has really written about it yet, and it's a woman called Daisy Dakin, who was a Morris dancer, and she was orphaned at 4 years old, and then she had no further education, but the thing that she could do really well was dance. So she went into France during the First War. She taught the war-weary troops, shell-shocked soldiers, how to do the Morris dance. And it just sort of defies the odds, really, that this small woman kind of did this amazingly huge thing to give joy and a little bit of hope again to these men, that suffered terrible atrocities, and she wanted to carry on doing her work in the Second World War, but for some reason, and there is nothing written down about why, she was not allowed to continue her work in the Second War. And the sad thing is, she took her own life, and we just felt it was really important that this woman's work and life was somehow documented and made current.
There were many different factors that came together that brought about the start of the war, and we feel that at this moment in time now, it feels like there are forces all over that are coming together, bringing conflict. So it's important to keep talking about the war, keep talking about what happened, to try and prevent more wars in the future, really.
I mean, the first thing I thought when approached to do the 1418 Now project is how little I know about the First World War. I knew absolutely nothing, really. My knowledge of it was very small. So it was kind of like Yeah, this sounds like something I really want to do, but something that I don't know anything about. So, time to get researching really and try and find out, try and ask the right questions, and just try and find a read on how I can interpret this in a way that's, you know, slightly different to how I necessarily approach another song about a different time of war or something like that. Because I felt that the instigation of it resonated with me in a way that I didn't expect it to, I guess. It led me to Archduke Ferdinand, and in particular, it would be like to be kind of constantly knowing that you're doing what you think is the right thing, but at the same time you're seen as rebelling from within the system that you're in, and how something as kind of conflicted as that can then, you know, through assassination, kick off a whole massive conflict. Made me just kind of think about what he must have been feeling on the morning that he woke up, you know, kind of that sense of constant pressure and lack of kind of conforming within the environment that he's in, and how much of a bold decision it was to kind of stand up for a different side of people. How much of that then affected into the rest of the conflict really, but more, you know, there's not many wars that start with the death of one human really. So kind of using a bit of poetic license and kind of picturing myself in that environment, and, you know, trying to imagine myself, and that's kind of how I ended up with the song.
I'm lucky enough to live near the National Memorial Arboretum. It's an amazing place with so many sculptures and installations and ceremonies to again, you know, commemorate the servicemen and women who gave their lives in service of this country, and soldiers from overseas. And they have a beautiful memorial there to the 306 men who were shot at dawn for various crimes, murdering a fellow soldier, but including cowardice and failing to bear arms. It's beautiful. It has a young man with a blindfold on, with a target on his chest, a huge, maybe 20 foot statue, and it led me to kind of do some reading up and find some research, and I found a name, Robert Lovelace Barker, a young man who was shot at dawn. I believe for cowardice and desertion, a mixture of the two. There are so little records kept about these men because of course they were killed, you know, during a very hectic time for the army, and I just, you know, I felt that with the knowledge we have now, a lot of these young men will have been suffering from shell shock and post-traumatic stress syndrome, the whole shebang, and yet they were treated as criminals, and I felt it was an important thing to write about.
Harry was born in 1899. He's a big lad. He's working for the post office. So when war broke out, these awful people, probably Michael Gove's grandmother, kept giving him white feathers and accusing him of cowardice by not joining up. So about the age of 15, he lied about his age and joined the Post Office Rifles. And the Post Office Rifles, presumably they would have known they got this junior working for him. They connived, they let him in. He got wounded in the leg, got shot in the leg, spent 3 days in a shell hole that was poisoned by mustard gas. And that's why his skin was yellow. I didn't realise why his skin was yellow till I was researching the album about my granddad's. And as long as I knew him, he had short of breath. And I vividly remember my mum, we were out walking the dog, and she said, well, you know, your granddad's got lung cancer and it's not going to get any better. So there's all that, and I know that it took 50 years to kill him, but the First World War killed him, and it ruined his quality of life. And there he was, puffing and wheezing round after the ball with his brothers who weren't gassed. That generation of men, they're probably about as old as I am now, but in those days, you never saw them without a raincoat and a trilby hat on. And suddenly, the raincoats came off, the trilby hats came off, the jackets came off, sometimes even the waistcoats came off. And there they were, in their shirts, which is unheard of, unseen, and braces, and kicking the ball about. And so that was the way in for the song. And I think it's important that we remember that it wasn't in any way a glorious endeavour, it wasn't anything that people had to do, it was forced upon the people of Europe by the bungling and incompetence and greed of their imperialistic rulers. And I think we need to remember that, because otherwise what they'll do is they'll use the First World War as an excuse to justify future military adventures. And so I think it's important that we get a proper perspective on the First World War. We acknowledge the suffering of the people who are involved in it, but we also understand that it was a mistake. And I hope that my voice will be contributing to that debate.